What if I told you that hidden in caves for nearly 2,000 years were texts that could completely change how we understand ancient history and religion? What if the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century was deliberately kept from the public for decades? In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a stone into a dark cave near the Dead Sea and accidentally uncovered the most controversial religious documents in human history. Documents so explosive that scholars fought for 50 years to keep them secret. If you're fascinated by ancient mysteries and hidden history, you're going to want to subscribe and hit that bell icon. Because today we're diving deep into secrets that powerful people didn't want you to know. Welcome to the darkest corners of history. Today, we're uncovering the Dead Sea Scrolls mystery. A discovery so significant that it shook the foundations of Christianity, Judaism, and our understanding of the ancient world. But first, let me ask you this, and drop your answer in the comments below. What do you think happens when archaeological discoveries contradict established religious teachings? Do they get revealed to the world, or do they get buried? Keep that question in mind as we journey back to that fateful day in 1947, when everything we thought we knew about ancient texts was about to change forever. Picture this: the Judean Desert, 1947. World War II has just ended, tensions are rising in Palestine, and a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Edhdib is searching for a lost goat near the shores of the Dead Sea. He climbs the rocky cliffs of Qumran. He notices a small opening in the rock face, a cave, dark and unexplored. Hoping his goat might have wandered inside, he picks up a stone and throws it into the darkness, but instead of the bleat of a goat, he hears something else entirely: the sound of pottery breaking. That sound, that single moment, would lead to the most important archaeological discovery of the modern era. When Muhammad and his cousins finally entered the cave, they found large clay jars, some nearly intact, others broken, on the cave floor. Inside these ancient vessels were scrolls, leather and papyrus documents wrapped in linen, preserved by the dry desert climate for nearly 2 millennia. But here's where the story gets interesting and dark. These weren't just any ancient documents. The Bedouins knew they had found something valuable, but they had no idea they had just uncovered texts that would challenge the very foundations of organized religion. The scrolls contained biblical texts that were over 1,000 years older than any previously known manuscripts. Think about that for a moment: texts that predated our oldest biblical manuscripts by an entire millennium. But that's just the beginning. Drop a comment below if you think this discovery was purely accidental, or if something this significant was meant to be found. Because what happened next is where our story takes a very dark turn. The Bedouins sold their first scrolls to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem for less than $30. Those same scrolls would later be worth millions. But more importantly, they contained secrets that certain people would spend the next 50 years trying to hide from the world. Between 1947 and 1956, archaeologists discovered scrolls and fragments in 11 different caves around Qumran. In total, they found over 900 documents containing more than 100,000 fragments of text. But what did these scrolls actually contain? And why were they so controversial? The Dead Sea Scrolls can be divided into 3 main categories, and each one posed a different threat to established religious doctrine. First, there were biblical manuscripts, copies of books from the Hebrew Bible that were copied between 300 BCE and 100 CE. These included nearly every book of the Old Testament, with the most famous being the Great Isaiah Scroll, a complete copy of the book of Isaiah that was 1,000 years older than any previously known version. But here's what made scholars uncomfortable. When they compared these ancient texts to our modern Bible, they found differences. Not major differences, but enough variations to raise uncomfortable questions about the accuracy of texts that billions consider the Word of God. The second category was even more explosive documents that described the beliefs and practices of the community that hid these scrolls. These included the Community Rule, also called the Manual of Discipline, the War Scroll, describing an apocalyptic battle between good and evil, the Thanksgiving Hymns, the Damascus Document. These texts revealed a Jewish sect with beliefs that were remarkably similar to early Christianity, but they predated Jesus by decades or even centuries. They spoke of a teacher of righteousness, ritual baptism, communal meals, and the coming of two messiahs. The third category was perhaps the most dangerous to established religion, completely unknown texts that offered alternative interpretations of biblical events and prophecies. But here's where our story gets really dark. When scholars first began studying these scrolls, they realized they had a problem. These texts didn't just fill in gaps in our historical knowledge. They challenged fundamental assumptions about the origins of Christianity and Judaism. So what did they do? They decided that the world wasn't ready for these revelations. A small group of scholars was given exclusive access to the scrolls, and they began a decades-long process of controlling what information would be released to the public. Comment below. Do you think religious and academic authorities have the right to control what historical information the public can access? Because what happened next shows just how far some people will go to protect established beliefs. So who wrote these controversial documents? Who were the people so committed to preserving these texts that they hid them in desert caves for 2,000 years? Most scholars agree that the scrolls were created by a Jewish sect called the Essenes, a group that the ancient historians Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder described as one of the three main Jewish sects of their time, alongside the Pharisees and Sadducees. But the Essenes weren't your typical religious group. They were radical separatists who believed that mainstream Judaism had become corrupted. They withdrew to the desert to create their own pure community, following strict rules of ritual purity and preparing for what they believed would be the end times. Archaeological evidence suggests that Qumran was home to a community of about 200 people who lived a monastic lifestyle. They shared all possessions in common, practiced ritual baptism, ate communal meals, and spent their days copying and studying religious texts. But here's what made early scholars uncomfortable. The Essenes' beliefs and practices were strikingly similar to those of early Christians. They believed in ritual baptism for the forgiveness of sins. They practiced communal meals with bread and wine. They expected two messiahs, one priestly and one royal. They believed in the immortality of the soul. They emphasized love of God and neighbor. They lived in communities that shared all possessions. The problem? These practices were documented among the Essenes decades or even centuries before the birth of Jesus. This raised uncomfortable questions. Did Christianity borrow from Essene theology? Were Jesus and John the Baptist influenced by Essene teachings? Or were they perhaps Essenes themselves? The scrolls speak extensively of a figure called the Teacher of Righteousness, a messianic leader who was persecuted by mainstream Jewish authorities and who established the community's beliefs and practices. Some scholars have suggested parallels between this figure and Jesus, though the timeline doesn't align perfectly. The Essenes likely hid their scrolls around 68 CE, when Roman forces were approaching Qumran during the Jewish revolt. They wrapped their most precious documents in linen, sealed them in jars, and hid them in caves, probably hoping to return after the conflict ended. They never returned. The community was destroyed, and their scrolls remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years. But think about what this means We have a documented Jewish sect whose beliefs and practices closely paralleled early Christianity, preserved in their own words, written before or during the time of Jesus. This raises some profound questions that I want you to think about and share in the comments. If the Essenes practiced many of the same rituals and held many of the same beliefs as early Christians, what does this tell us about the origins of Christianity? Were these ideas unique to Jesus, or were they part of a broader religious movement in first-century Palestine? Now we come to the darkest part of our story, the 50-year conspiracy to keep these scrolls from the public eye. When scholars first realized the full implications of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they faced a dilemma. These texts had the potential to revolutionize our understanding of both Judaism and Christianity, but they also threatened to undermine centuries of religious doctrine. In 1952, an international team of 8 scholars was assembled to study and publish the scrolls. This team, led by Father Roland de Vaux and dominated by Christian scholars, was given exclusive access to the most important and controversial documents. But instead of rushing to share these earth-shattering discoveries with the world, something very different happened. The team began to slow down their work. They published some of the less controversial biblical texts relatively quickly, but the sectarian documents, the ones that revealed the most about Essene beliefs and practices, were held back. For 5 decades, a small group of scholars controlled access to some of the most important religious documents ever discovered. They published their findings slowly, selectively, and often with interpretations that minimized the scrolls' challenge to traditional Christianity. By the 1980s, other scholars were becoming frustrated. They accused the international team of deliberately suppressing material that contradicted Christian doctrine. The controversy reached a breaking point in 1991, when the Huntington Library in California announced it would allow unrestricted access to photographs of all the scrolls, breaking the decades-long monopoly. So what were they so afraid of revealing? Several key points. Pre-Christian parallels. The scrolls showed that many supposedly unique Christian practices and beliefs existed among Jews before Jesus was born. Biblical variations. The scrolls contained versions of biblical texts that differed from our standard versions, raising questions about biblical accuracy and authority. Alternative interpretations. Some scrolls offered interpretations of biblical prophecies and events that contradicted traditional Christian and Jewish understandings. The Messianic timeline. The scroll's discussion of messianic expectations and the teacher of righteousness complicated traditional narratives about Jesus as the unique Messiah. The conflict over the scrolls wasn't just academic. It became a battle between different interpretations of religious history. Conservative scholars argued that the scrolls confirmed traditional beliefs, while others saw them as evidence that Christianity emerged from a broader context of Jewish messianic movements. Today, all the Dead Sea Scrolls have been published and are available for study. High-resolution images are available online, and scholars worldwide can examine them without restriction. But the damage from the decades of secrecy had been done. It raised questions about who controls historical narrative and whether the public has a right to immediate access to discoveries that might challenge established beliefs. Even now, scholars continue to debate the scrolls' implications. Some maintain that they support traditional religious narratives, while others argue they prove that Christianity developed from existing Jewish mystical and messianic traditions. Here's what I want you to consider, and please share your thoughts in the comments. If these scrolls had been immediately published and openly studied in 1947, how might our understanding of religious history be different today? Do you think the 50-year delay was justified, or was it a deliberate attempt to control religious narrative? So where do we stand today with the Dead Sea Scrolls? What's their current relevance, and what are we still discovering? Today, cutting-edge technology is revealing secrets that scholars in 1947 could never have imagined. Multispectral imaging is uncovering text on fragments that appeared blank to the naked eye. DNA analysis is helping scholars determine which fragments belong together. Digital reconstruction is allowing us to virtually unroll scrolls too fragile to handle physically. As recently as 2021, archaeologists discovered new scroll fragments in caves near Qumran, the first such discoveries in 60 years. These fragments contain text from the books of Zechariah and Nahum, proving that there may still be more scrolls waiting to be found in the Judean desert. The Israel Museum houses most of the scrolls in climate-controlled conditions designed to preserve them for future generations. The most famous scrolls are displayed in the Shrine of the Book, a distinctive white dome structure that has become an iconic part of Jerusalem's skyline. Perhaps most importantly, the entire collection has been digitized in ultra-high resolution. The Digital Dead Sea Scrolls project allows anyone with an internet connection to examine these ancient texts in detail that surpasses what most scholars had access to for decades. New translations and interpretations continue to emerge. Each generation of scholars brings fresh perspectives to these ancient texts, and our understanding continues to evolve. Recent scholarship has focused less on the controversial implications for Christianity and more on understanding the scrolls within their own historical context. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that history is complex and that our understanding of the past is always evolving. They show us that the religious landscape of first-century Palestine was diverse and dynamic, with multiple groups holding different interpretations of Jewish law and messianic expectations. More broadly, the scrolls teach us about the importance of preserving alternative voices and perspectives. The Essenes were a minority group whose views differed from mainstream Judaism, but their preservation of these texts has given us invaluable insights into ancient religious thought. They also remind us of the importance of transparency in scholarship and the dangers of allowing small groups to control access to important historical discoveries. The Dead Sea Scrolls represent one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history. They've given us unprecedented insight into ancient Jewish thought, the historical context of early Christianity, and the complex religious landscape of first-century Palestine. But perhaps more importantly, they've taught us about the power of hidden knowledge and the importance of transparency in historical research. That young Bedouin shepherd who threw a stone into a dark cave in 1947 couldn't have known that he was about to uncover texts that would challenge our understanding of religion, history, and the development of Western civilization. The scrolls that were hidden in those caves for 2,000 years are now available for anyone to study. They're a testament to the power of preservation, the importance of diverse voices, and the ongoing evolution of human understanding. If this journey into ancient mysteries fascinated you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have that notification bell turned on. We dive deep into history's darkest secrets and most intriguing mysteries every week. And I really want to hear from you in the comments below. What aspect of the Dead Sea Scrolls mystery intrigued you the most? Do you think there are still more scrolls waiting to be discovered? And what other ancient mysteries would you like us to explore? If you learned something new today, hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people who are passionate about uncovering history's hidden truths. And if you're interested in more content about ancient mysteries, religious history, and archaeological discoveries, check out our other videos. There's a whole playlist of ancient mysteries that will keep you questioning everything you thought you knew about the past. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history. Until next time, keep questioning, Keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often stranger and more complex than we imagine. The Dead Sea Scrolls are waiting for you to discover them. The question is, are you ready for what you might find?